Thanks for stopping by, guys, and welcome back to Scrap Mechanic. Today we're going to be looking at a new MBT. This is the MBT Mark 36 Chimera. Now, compared to the Goblin, there isn't much changed features-wise. However, there has been a number of improvements, mainly speaking on frame rates. Goblin had a major issue with frame rates, especially in battle, making it unusable in most combat situations. However, the Chimera here has fixed most, if not all of those, sporting an average of about 80 frames per second. So for me, that's about a 20 to 40 frame rate drop in most situations, which is really good for tanks. Even compared to something like the Wyvern or the Drake, they usually sat about 50 or 60 frames. This usually sits about 80. Now, features wise, let's see what it has. It has the 4-round autoloader, has my standard aiming setup. You do have an iron sight if you need it. You do also have a bit of a groove sight on the gun itself if you need it. It does also have the ADS, which is kind of the new special feature. This uses a different system than the Goblin used for aiming the ADS, which reduced the bearing count and helped the frame rate. Armor wise, it is mostly the same armor as the Goblin and the Wyvern, which is the spaced armor. However, there is a bit of a difference with this frontal armor here, using an experimental armor suggested by Armstrong. In our last battle, he had something similar to this in his tank and recommended that I try it. So I also broke the tank apart so we can look at it inside and look at some of how the different features work, to hopefully give you guys a better idea. So starting with the chassis, hopping down in the turret ring, it's just an open turret ring. This, as you can see, is the I-beam blast shield of sorts that I have. I-beam protection is one of the things that we've used before, but it's not fully understood. We do know that it helps in some ways. Oftentimes it can reduce the blast radius of explosions and protect parts that would normally be destroyed without it. But we don't fully understand it well enough that everyone uses it, and it's sort of an afterthought in most situations. Here it was purpose built, and it only covers the front and the sides. It does not cover the rear, because if I'm getting hit in the rear, I've messed up anyway. Coming to the back, you can see the engine pack. The majority of my tanks actually use this engine pack. It is a pre-built, pre-designed pack that has all the engines, the A&D converter, and everything ready to go. Now, these engines are set to 0 just so that this can sit by itself, but normally these would be the values. These are for the driving, and then these are for the steering. You can see how it's hooked up. These would just go to the seat, and this would go to the seat for steering. Now, the bearings are a little bit different than you normally expect. They're the same that are in the Goblin and the Drake. However, the Wyvern and the tank steering tutorial I had are a bit different. For these, all of the bearings are rotating forward, rather than my other designs where the turning bearings would be rotating backwards. The simple reason for this is chasing vehicles. Having the bearings set up like this gives you a little bit less control while moving forwards, but you keep your momentum and you can move much faster, allowing you to chase down enemies a lot easier. Now, if you're in reverse, you maintain that same maneuverability you're used to with something like the Wyvern. And that also benefits you because if you are in reverse and you are fleeing, you get that maneuverability that allows you to dodge shells and quickly make it around corners to get out of line of sight for your enemies. So, let's go ahead and hop on over to the turret. Now, the main thing to note here is actually the ADS. We'll be looking at the gun separately here in a second. So, the ADS is controlled by a controller in the gun breech itself back here. Now, this is a sensor on a bearing. As it falls, it looks for a piece of black on the gun itself. As it hits that, it moves back up, and then it doesn't detect the black, so it falls back down, and that's why it kind of twitches up and down. It falls until it sees the black, it moves up a little bit, then comes back down, and basically tests for the gun. If I can get my camera in here, see if I can get a good angle on it. As I bring it up, the sensor will start moving up, As I bring it down, it'll start moving down, and that's how it checks for the angle of the gun. And as the controller moves this angle for the sensor, it also moves the angle for the ADS, allowing it to aim up and down. And the default difference I have between these is 30, so that this is 30 degrees higher, so that when it detects the black, it's a little bit, it's hard to explain, simply put, but the 30 degrees is so that it can detect with a bit of a higher accuracy and to make sure that the ADS and the main gun are in line. All of the logic is also stored in the turret for the aiming machine guns and such, just behind the driver's seat. The aiming machine guns are on a slower rate of fire to help reduce recoil and make it easier to aim. However, there is a separate clock that runs the ADS. The ADS needs a much higher fire rate than the aiming machine guns, so it has a separate clock. It has separate timers to fire the pairs from the bottom to the top, 1, 2, 3. The ADS, like I've said before, is something I do want to go into further detail in its own dedicated video. However, I am still perfecting this system, and I want to get it as good as I can get it before I do a proper tutorial on it. So from here, I can actually rotate the gun and point it like I normally would, aiming and firing as I see fit. Now, hopping over the gun, this does use somewhat of a standard stabilizer. The left and right motion are the same, the stabilizer is the same. What's really different here is the vertical, I guess you'd say the vertical elevation mechanism. On the Wyvern and the Drake, it was off to the side. In the Goblin, it was very similar to this, but it had some issues. As you can see, it does have glitch welded parts. These are vanilla glitch weld parts. These are like piston and spring welds. It's hard to see, but there is also a spring right here in the gun, which is how this is so compact. Now, essentially what this is, this piston is attached to the block it's in, attached to that block, but it's also occupying that block, so it's actually pushing this one forward into, let's see if I can break my own suspension glitch. One moment. This is really compacted in here and hard to get to. There we go. There's also another glitched piston here. These two pistons push on these blocks, which pushes on a spring here, and is what gives you the elevation mechanism. It works the exact same as the Wyvern's does. However, it is much more compact because the actual pistons are inside the blocks that they're attached to, reducing the overall length needed for this and allowing me to quite literally cram it into the gun breech. So that's really it, looking into the mechanisms of it. There is a few things I think I missed. I don't think I went over the controls all too well. This is going to be using my standard control scheme. Currently this is an M model, so it is my personal control scheme. However, there will be a standard model for everyone else to use. The one thing of note, the controls are all the same. The only difference is to note is the ADS is hooked up with the aiming machine guns. So whenever you hit the aiming machine guns, you will get the ADS as well. However, if you press 7, you will turn off the ADS. You can see the light down there by my seat. So if you just want the aiming machine guns by themselves, you can, or you can have the ADS firing. And one more thing I think I forgot to mention with the ADS is if you look back here, there is a thruster. This is simply to kind of counteract the recoil of the guns. Preferably, you'd actually want the thruster to be behind the guns to directly dampen the recoil. However, with the size of this turret, it is essentially creating the same recoil on this side of the gun, so that rather than the turret rotating, it just pushes the turret backwards a little bit, which you can actually see with the tank rolling slightly when you fire. You see it slightly scooting backwards. overall, I think that's really all there is to say about the Chimera. One other thing to note, I think hopefully this is the last thing. Whenever you spawn it on the lift, it will always spawn with the ADS pointed up into the sky and not attached to the gun. Just simply attach the ADS, raise the gun up to meet the ADS, and now it's attached and it will follow the gun now. I'm not exactly sure what's causing this, however, it is something simple to get rid of, especially at the beginning of the battle when you first spawn it, but you do have to remember to get your ADS hooked up. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, please leave a like. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments down below. Enjoy the channel, enjoy what I'm doing. Please subscribe, it helps out a lot. And right now, shares help the channel the most. So if you do want to help the channel, please share this episode with a friend. Thanks for stopping by, thanks for sticking around. Until next time, peace.